Hello and welcome to the taping of Our People Speak, a monthly program produced by Danakanaga Tanana Chiefs Conference and the Morris Thompson Cultural and Visitor Center. Today we're going to be speaking about Native ice cream, how to make it, and what does it really mean to our Native people of our region. Our guest today is Kathleen Hildebrand, who is a very esteemed educator within our region, and she's here to share her knowledge about Native ice cream. So first of all, welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you.
Before we get started, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself some more?
Okay, sure. My name is Kathleen Hildebrand Meckel. I grew up in the village of Nulato. I am the daughter of the late Edith and Barney Hildebrand of Nulato. And on my paternal side, my grandparents are the late Eddie and Alice Hildebrand. And on my maternal side, the late Rita and Anthony Patsy. And I grew up in Nulato, raised pretty much by elders. It was very intergenerational. The way we worked, it was a total subsistence lifestyle. Nulato was one of the Catholic missions in the state of Alaska, so that was a huge part of our lives. But still, the people were very much traditional. We cut fish, we hunted for moose, we trapped and just did everything, gathering on the land, very much traditional, with the Western education coming through the church system.
So just for those that just heard her introduction, for those watching and those in the audience, the way she did her introduction to you is a traditional way we do. We tell you who our parents are, our grandparents, which tribes we belong to. So for myself, I'm Inupiaq Eskimo. I'm from the village of Evansville, which is located above the Brooks Range, above the Arctic Circle in the Brooks Range. So, and my parents were the late Mac and Helen McConnell. So we're just pleased you're all here. And before we start the process and showing people how to make the ice cream, Kathleen, could you just tell us a little bit about the history that you know of about Native ice cream?
Native ice cream was Athabascan. I'm Athabascan. The way we did it in our village has been around from when the people were first hunting. When they got animals with fat, they would take the fat and render it, like melt it down and just make it a pure fat, and they would whip it. So, and the fat normally came from moose, bear, or caribou. And the fish, we use whitefish. And the whitefish we have, there's like, I think 15 varieties of whitefish in Alaskan streams. And she-fish, one of the major fish we get right near my village, just at the mouth of the Nulato River, which is like a mile right down the road. So those were huge parts of who we are and a part of our food system. And then with westernization, with Western people coming in, of course they brought conveniences and bad things, sugar and fat, lard, and people gradually moved away from making their own tallow and from just flavoring with only berries that the people gathered in the summer to things that you can get from the grocery store, like sugar. So kind of different.
Can you tell us a little bit about what time of year do you gather some of these traditional ingredients? You talked about the fish and the berries. And the fat from the moose and bear. Could you tell us about that?
The moose was traditionally gathered or hunted in the time when it was cold. And prior to contact, the men were extremely resilient and strong. And in the wintertime, it was easier when there was snow on the ground, to get moose. So you hear the stories growing up about the men used to put on snowshoes and run down the moose because it's a big animal. Their lungs will give out before you did if you were fast on your snowshoes, and that's how traditionally they got them. Today, of course, we have to follow hunting regulations set by the federal government and the state government, so we have a certain 2-window period in September to hunt for moose. And in the wintertime, the moose of course is much fatter, and when you get your moose, there's a lot of meat there for the family, and the fat, usually like the fat within the stomach, is the kind of the best choicest fat. I think everybody who eat moose would agree with that. But that was whipped up, and after it was rendered, it was whipped up to make like the base for the Indian ice cream. And the fish was gathered in for she fish, we gather it in the summer when we're finished getting our king salmon. Like when we're all done working at the king salmon and we're ready for the next phase. Things kind of happen in stages with Indigenous people. There's like a time for everything in each season. Like all year long you can gather fish. And the fish come at different times when they're ready. So after the king salmon has been caught and put away and it's in your smokehouse, you know, smoking or drying, then you can go and get your she fish. And it's kind of like a fun time because if you're a pole fisher person, you know, that's a fun fish to catch because it gives you a good chase to reel it in. And that's after king salmon is when we get our she fish. And then at the exact same time, the salmon berries are ready, cloudberries actually. Salmon berries are in the southeast along the coast, but we use salmon berries in our fish ice cream. And then this is the same time you gather it. When you're done with the king salmon, you go out and you get your she fish, and you go out and you get your salmon berries. And these events are whole family events, intergenerational. Great-grandmas, grandmas, moms, dads, brothers and sisters, nieces, cousins, you know, everybody. You all move out to different places, like go to the land where you go and gather. Just in your village, you don't gather right around there. You go to where it's at. And sometimes the whole village would go. Sometimes there's different places people would go. But usually it's whole family units that would move. And it's a huge thing because it's a part of our food system back in the day. Like living in Fairbanks, we can run to Fred Meyer's or Safeway, but at home in the village, we don't have that. So it's still a huge part of who we are today, the going out and gathering. And blueberries, like right now, they're green. People are going out looking at the berries. If you're a person that do medicinal plants, you'll be looking at the flowers for blueberries or even the salmon berries. And you can gather it and start making tea because that can help sustain your body throughout the year. So it's like I said, in each season, you go and you gather. And then depending on the land, like if it's low land, like in swampy areas or versus being on the hills, at different times, depending on what you're gathering, and this, you know, like the type of land, some things get ready earlier in different places. So your Indigenous people here in Alaska, Athabascan, Inupiaq, Yupik, all of us, Tlingit, we're still tied to the land. It's like who we are. It's a strong connection. The connection to the berries, to the plants, to the land, to the fish, to the water. That's who we are. You're good to the foods you gather. You're not wasteful. You use everything. To the moose, same thing. You use everything. Traditionally, the whole moose was used. The brain, the meat on the skull, the legs for tools, the hide to make your clothing, all of the meat and all of the fat. Even the fat was used for medicinal purposes. So we're very much connected to our food source, to the land and to the animals, fish.
Right. And like you said, Kathleen, here in Fairbanks, a hub area, you know, it's easy for us to go to the store, but we want to reiterate, if you're from a village in Alaska, in our region, well, anywhere in Alaska in a village, the cost of goods are very, very expensive. A gallon of milk is like $15, something like. Someone just posted online that there was a turkey, I think it was a 20-pound turkey, on sale at their store. I think it was up in Ukviagvik, Barrow formerly, for about $150 or something like that. It's crazy. So again, not only is it important to us as Indigenous people, this food and this connection to us as Native people, but in this day and age too, it's important that we gather these things to sustain us as well because of the cost of freight and getting these goods I guess, contemporary goods out into the villages. But as Kathleen said, it is very connected to our way of life. It's very important for us. You talked about the fish that you gather, the berries, and the fat. Can you talk about how you prep all these things before you start making the ice cream?
Okay. because you want it to last a long time. Traditionally, we dried a lot of our foods and then gathered later in the year and dug into the ground to permafrost levels and put things in baskets. But today we have vacuum sealers, deep freezers. So when we go out fishing, we don't leave our fish overnight. Like when I'm going to the Nulato River to get the she fish, right away, as soon as we get home, we start cleaning it, cutting it up. Sometimes even right there at the river, we'll cut it up because there'll be like eggs and even the guts for she fish. It tastes so good if you know how to clean it and cut it up and fry it in the pan right away. It's a delicacy. It's so good. And then the meat on the whitefish we scale it because it has really big scales. But keep the skin on, slough off the scale on the she fish, and then fillet it off, and then just cut it in half so you'd have 4 pieces basically from one big she fish. And then you can vacuum seal that and put it in your freezer, and it can last. If you're lucky and you have a good vacuum sealer, it can last a couple years. If you're not eating it as much, and if you have a lot of fish, sometimes, by December, your she fish could be gone. It's kind of up to the family use and how you do it. So that's one of the ways we do the fish before bringing it to this place. And then for the berries, of course, we have freezers, so we clean our berries right away, try to get all of the stems off each end, especially if it's blueberries, and then freeze that and save it for later. If you're into dehydrating, you can dehydrate your berries and then use that in a variety of ways. And the salmon berries, you pick them. Some people pick them when they're really ripe and juicy so that you don't have to clean the coating that comes on it, like the little petals, so you don't have to pull it off. They pick it when it's really juicy. But some people don't like it that juicy, so you can pick it when it's still kind of tight and then clean it off. It'll ripen a little bit on your table while you're waiting to get that. And usually you have to go very far to get salmon berries. Like in my village, we go back to the Caillou Flats. It's the traditional hunting grounds, and it's like a day boat trip. And in Fairbanks, literally, you have to drive at least a couple hundred miles to almost a couple hundred miles to get them, unless you have a secret patch someplace.
And everybody has their secret patches.
Yep.
Yes.
So, and I'm not going to say north, south, east, or west because I don't want to give away any patches. And out of Fairbanks, we used to just drive, like 15 miles to get blueberries. Like a lot of the native people will meet in the berry patch just a little bit north of Fairbanks. And I just got word this morning now that one of the favorite blueberry patches, there's road work being done, and their native people are not allowed to go there anymore. So that's like a big blow to us. So find new blueberry patches, guys. Go to the mountains south. So that's kind of how we put the stuff away, pretty much. And
I know you don't have, is this bear fat, moose fat, or Crisco?
Crisco.
So if you did have traditional fat, how would you render that?
If I had traditional fat, usually it's rendered in the fall time. For traditional fat, you just put it you could use a crock pot today and just keep it on low until it turns into liquid, and then strain it through like a cheesecloth. And usually we used to put them in bread tins, so it would just have a block like a bread, so it kind of looked like Velveeta cheese almost, except it's white. Trying to think of something. Or Tillamook cheese, white Tillamook cheese, imagine that. That's kind of what rendered fat would look like. And you just let it sit, and then it'll get solid again, and then you could vacuum seal that and put it in your freezer and use it. Same with caribou. And when you're going to use the rendered fat, you could grate it so it can be in smaller pieces, and the warmth of your hand, you put it in the bowl and you start whipping it up. The warmth of your hand will melt it in the act of moving, and it'll start getting fluffy. And And to sweeten it, you could add sugar to it. If you're traditional, you do not add sugar, and you add berries to it too. And if it's not whipping, you could add a little bit of water to it. Depending on where you're from, some people use seal oil, like add seal oil to it to whip it up. Even olive oil works today if you don't have seal oil.
And then could you talk about Crisco?
And then Crisco, of course, was one of the things that came with westernization. And Crisco whips up really fast. You don't have to render it. It's already in this kind of pure white state. But of course, it's not good for your heart or your arteries. But it's one of the things that the native people, you know, they saw, okay, this is a substitution that we can use. And especially when we have these big gatherings where we feed many people, like potlatches. If you're going to make a big batch, you'll whip up a big batch, and Crisco is easier to use, so it'll fluff up really good, and you could add sugar to it to make it even fluffier and sweet. And it's just plain white sugar, or you can use organic sugar. My daughter is like totally organic, everything for my grandson, so I try to do organic for him and stay away from the Crisco too.
And then the milk, you have milk here?
Yep, and then we have milk. Once the Crisco and the sugar is whipped up, when you add the she-fish to it, I'm gonna go backwards, reverse, okay. When you're gonna cook your she-fish, you'll take it out of the freezer, you let it thaw out, and then put it in a pot of water. I don't salt mine or anything. Then you'll cook your she-fish, and it's usually when I have mine, it's a little bigger than my palms. The meat is skin out and meat together like that when I freeze it. And then I'll just put it like that in the pot, cover it up with water, and let it come to a gentle boil, not full rolling, because I want it to stay firm, for about 15, 20 minutes. When it's done, I take it out and just put it in my strainer, and then I'll leave it together, and then peel off the skin and if there's any scales left on it, peel that off, and then take the top layer off and put it on a plate, and then peel off the other side. And sometimes the blood that was left in there will leave like a brown residue. My mom was very picky when she was teaching us. My grandma taught her. You scrape out all the blood, brown stuff. You don't leave it in there because you want it to be white. And the fish will be flaky, kind of like this. I know it's kind of hard to see, but it'll be flaky like that. And you clean out all the bones. So I take all the flakes apart and examine each bone, because you don't want any bones in there. It could get caught in your throat. And then you squeeze it really hard. So here's a bunch of it squeezed. Just squeeze the heck out of it, and this white juice will come out of it. And the elders, my great-grandma, Annie, she used to like to drink the fish broth. And I used to save it in a cup to bring it to my grandma when I made it at my mom's house. And once you've squeezed all the juice out, then you'll take the squeezed parts like that and just kind of rub it between your hands to dry it out further until it's just this fine powdery fish. It's just a fine powder. And that fine powdery fish is what I'll put that into the whipped up fat mixture. And once I'll start adding the fish flakes to it and whip it. And if it's feeling like it's thick, I use carnation milk instead of water to kind of keep adding it to whip it. And some people have done it with coconut oil, the white coconut stuff, coconut milk, whip it up with that. So today we're finding that based on our needs, health eats, and being health conscious, we're making modifications.
So when you say whip it, you're not talking about an
no.
beater.
I use my hand, and it's traditional. And people will say, oh, you should just use a beater, it's quicker, and they do, but it's so funny because it's a meditative process when you try to keep things close to traditional as possible. Because when I'm whipping it, it takes so long to whip. It's a big bowl. When I'm whipping it, I think about my grandma Alice, and she passed away when I was 9, and here I am well into my 60s. So it brings back memories of her, because she loved to feed her family, and this was a delicacy. I think about my mom and how my mom learned everything from my grandma, and my mom was like the expert fish ice cream maker in my village. When we went to potlatches with our big bowls of fish ice cream for the community, people will look, and my mom wrote her name on her pot. It said Edith N, you know. So people will look for mom's pot, and they, you know, like when the pots are coming around, they'll see that, oh, that's Edith's, that's Edith's. Then people will like, oh yes, I'll have some, please may I have some, you know. So, and she taught all of her daughters, her sons, my sister-in-laws, my mom taught all of us, and all of her granddaughters. It was important for her to pass this on to us. And I think it's the meditative process when you're whipping, because all of these, I mean, I thought, like in the conversation, potlatches, that's when the community gathers. And the first people to get the fish ice cream first are the elders. The eldest elder get their fish ice cream first, because that's the delicacy. That's better than, you know, like when I was a little girl, peaches, canned peaches were passed out to at potlatches, and that was like what kids got. Little kids got canned peaches, and the elders got fish ice cream or Indian ice cream. So it's so many memories. All of these things come flooding back to me as I'm whipping it. And then with my grandchildren, when they're around, when I'm making it, I'll tell them, you know, in the village when I was growing up, this is how it was. And little kids had this place. You had to sit on the floor in front of your parents. Parents, they would be sitting along the benches listening to speeches while people brought their food in. So all of these memories and traditional practices, this is how we carry it on, and we help to remember. You know, muscle memory, the act of doing something brings it back. And for grandchildren, when babies make their first step, when they just are learning to walk, in our culture, in our village, you have to make fish ice cream, and you have to share it with your family to celebrate, to honor the mobility of this baby. So that's still an important practice. And I saw on social media, one of my nieces, her little girl just started walking. So she went through the whole process of making fish ice cream for her daughter. And it was so cool because of looking at the comments. I love that about social media today. All the different family members that could participate at a distance. That's important to keep us connected still.
So a lot of history with our recipes, our foods.
Yes.
You talked about whipping it up, the fish, and then when do you put the berries and the sugar
Okay. When I should back up again. I know. I mix the fat until it's really whipped up and fluffy. And then I'll add the sugar to it and keep whipping it, and going by the feel of it. When I can't feel granules of the sugar, then I'm done whipping. Then I add the fish in there then, and when it's all, the texture is just right, it looks good, it tastes good, then I divide just with my hand in the big bowl, I'll divide, like, depending on what I have, I might want to add blueberries, I might want to add salmon berries. Raisins are a new addition that some people love, so I might want to add raisins. We have blackberries, crowberries that we get in the fall time on the hills. Cranberries, Alaskan cranberries, lingonberries, we get those in the fall. And if you wait till after the first frost, they are so sweet. And all of those berries, they taste so good in here. So instead of mixing it all up, I'll divide in my bowl, section it off based on how many different types of berries I have. And I'll mix that in, and from my bowl, I can bring it to the community hall like that, and then they could disperse it. Or if I'm bringing it since I'm in Fairbanks, if I'm bringing it to my brothers and sisters, I'll put it in a container like this. Like here I had blueberries, and then there I had salmon berries. And it's like coveted. If one of my brothers down the highway in Northway heard I whipped up fish ice cream and I didn't have any for him in the freezer, his feelings will be really hurt. Like my brother that lives here in Fairbanks, Daryl, if I didn't make raisin fish ice cream for him, his feelings will be hurt. You know, and like the rest of us, my sisters and I, were like, oh, you made 2 different kinds. Oh, yum, and it's all gone.
So how long can you keep it? I mean, as you said, everybody loves to eat it right away, but how long can you keep it?
I don't even, it doesn't last very long.
Okay.
It just doesn't last very long. I mean, if I know I had some in my freezer, I would pick at it every day until it's gone. So I don't know if when my mom was living in the village, she would make some in the village and then put it in the freezer. She'll start making her traditional foods that all of her children loved, and she would put it in the freezer. And when she came to Fairbanks to visit us, she'd bring this cooler. And sometimes it would be up to 2 weeks. It would take her 2 weeks to make everybody's favorite.
Wow.
And then we'd all meet in one place and have food with her.
Wow.
So
you talked a little bit about the history and what it means to you, but what is your most memorable moment or favorite memory of making fish ice cream?
Oh, God, there's so many to pick one. Oh.
Brings back memories.
It does. Well, my mom passed away not even a year yet. And one of her granddaughters, one of my nieces, Tiffany, was in the military, and she had gotten out, and she went home after being gone for so long, and Grandma wanted to celebrate. Her grandma, my mom, wanted to celebrate her homecoming, and so she wanted to make her fish ice cream because that's a good, high, important food in our family. So Tiffany sat there at the table with my mom, and Tiffany ended up taking over and learning how to make it. So to me, that was special because, you know, just getting out of the military, you haven't been gone for all that time, then coming home and my mom having that quality time, and for them to reconnect. It was special because she's passing all of this knowledge forward, and Tiffany's tasted just like Mom's. That's the test. For it to taste just like Mom's. That's truly something, and Tiffany nailed it. So,
so
thank you.
Sorry,
I know.
But you mentioned it is something too, is that each family, when they make this, and even other native dishes, there's different, you can tell, you know, oh, that family made that dish because it's the way they were taught, and that comes up a lot too. One other thing, Kathleen, is what would you say to the youth? I mean, you talked about your niece and that special bonding and that connection, not only to the family, but to the native way of life. But what would you say to the youth about carrying on these practices?
It's really, it's important because it connects you to time and space. Like I said earlier, it's a meditative practice, so you're ever present. When you take the time to learn from your aunts, uncles, grandparents, you're connecting ancestral knowledge. You might, you know, have new twists and new spins on it, but it's ancestral knowledge you're continuing to carry forward. And ask questions for the youth. Don't be afraid to get your hands dirty, squeeze the fish, you know, it's all of it, all of this knowledge, the ways of preparing traditional foods, how to put food away. It's important for who we are, these things to maintain. And in Indigenous prophecies, you know, they're the practice or the saying, what we hear growing up from really young is, it's not always going to be like this, so it's always good to prepare for if ever there was a time when you couldn't get food easily. So know how to survive and take care of yourself, know how to be an independent provider. And so male, female, it's important for them to do this. And My grandchildren, they're always around for different Native food events on both sides of their families, their mom and dad sides. So it's important to pass knowledge on, I think. And if you don't have elders to turn to, you know, there's so many kids. Having been a public school teacher, I always made it a point to have grandparents in my classroom, traditional knowledge carriers, bearers, invite them in to share. I mean, you know, like how do you skin a caribou? Geez, who could we ask? Let's find out. Let's go get this person. How do you clean the fish? How do you cut it? Well, here's a knife, here's a fish. Let's figure it out. So don't be afraid to get your hands dirty and try and ask questions.
And I failed to ask you at the beginning of the show, so each tribe, you know, we have different dialects within our region, different languages are spoken. From where you're at, how do we call it native ice cream, Eskimo ice cream, Indian ice cream. Aguduk is referred to aguduk as some regions of Alaska. What do you call it in your native language? Do you know?
We call it nanasglotl. I know it's a big word, nanasglotl. I'm in the downriver dialect, Koyukon downriver dialect. Caltech and Nulato are the only two villages that have that dialect. And not even like the eggs, whitefish eggs, even that was kind of turned, they call it Indian ice cream too, where you take the fish eggs, you clean all of the membrane out of it, and you mash up low bush cranberries and mix it with those eggs. And just the acidic stuff from the cranberries and the whitefish, it's a perfect pairing too. It tastes so good. You don't add sugar to it. So many different ways of doing fish ice cream. Like I witnessed in Chivac, we're riding along in the boat, and the lady who was in charge of food was from that area. She just right away cooked her whitefish that she just pulled out of the river and whipped it up with seal oil and fresh seal oil, and we ate it on pilot bread crackers while we were driving on the river, and it was just amazing. So each area has their own way of preparing food, preserving food, and there's no right way and there's no wrong way. You know, everybody has their own way of doing things.
All right. And you just mentioned Chivac. That's in southwestern Alaska.
Oh, yes.
And they're mostly Yupik Chupik from that. It's not within our region. It's southwestern Alaska. So before we end, Kathleen, is there anything else that you'd like to mention that we may have missed?
No, I can't think of anything.
Okay, well, we sure appreciate you being here to talk about native ice cream, and we sure appreciate you being here. Our audience here, we've had a record audience for this taping of this show. Thank you so much, and thank you for watching Our People Speak, and we'll have another series on the second Friday of next month. Thank you so much.